I used to wake before the kettle, before the sparrows scratched at the laurel hedge, before the street remembered its name. In those first minutes, the house belonged to me entirely. The floorboards breathed like an old dog. The porch exhaled the night. I would stand at the sink and count the quiet. One for the window latch, one for the settling roof, one for the cup I'd chipped in 1983 when Daniel lost his first tooth. Then Tessa moved in with her boxes of minimalist glassware, and the quiet stopped counting me. It was meant to be, for a few months. He said it with his hands in his pockets, which is how my son tells my heart to prepare for disappointment. I nodded because I have spent a lifetime nodding, and because there were still moments when his jawline looked like his father's. At first, the house absorbed her. A second toothbrush in the blue cup, a sweater slung over the banister, the scent of something floral and manufactured that rode the air like a new tenant. Then the small replacements arrived. My enamel kettle disappeared in favor of a steel one that hissed like an unkind whisper. The spice rack I had built from driftwood made way for pale jars with printed labels. Turmeric, cumin, dream. "Your things are so storied," she said, running a finger over the nicked table. "I love that for you. For you." I smiled because women my age learn to turn smiles into furniture. Useful, steady, silent. In the evenings, their laughter climbed the staircase like ivy. It was the kind of laughter that rearranges pictures without touching them. The portrait of Daniel as a boy, crooked teeth, knees huge with promise, tilted of its own accord. Perhaps I imagined it. One afternoon, I found my sewing basket in the hall closet, measured and judged by her neat gaze. "We're decluttering," she said. "You'll feel lighter." She pronounced lighter like a destination, not a hope. "I have lived with weight," I told the basket. "It is how I know I am here." That night, Tessa served a salad with leaves I couldn't name. Daniel watched her mouth and not his fork. When he reached for my hand across the table, to pass the salt, not to touch, I realized the house had begun to edit me. I started waking before the waking, to beat their footsteps to the kitchen, to claim 5 minutes with my chipped cup. The sparrows still scratched the laurel. The kettle still took its time. But I could feel the difference. The quiet was no longer mine. It was on loan, and I had neglected to read the terms. I poured my tea and told myself this was a season, like the orange leaves that litter the walkway in November. But seasons return you to yourself. This felt like standing at the edge of a map and finding the legend missing. Outside, the street stretched and yawned. Inside, the dishwasher clicked its modern tongue. I turned my face toward the window and practiced the art that keeps older women alive. I made myself smaller, then smaller still, and called it grace. It begins with a word that sounds kind. Update. "We're updating the dining room," she said, as if it were a piece of software that occasionally froze. The lace curtains, my mother's, came down in the afternoon when I was out for groceries. In their place, linen the color of the inside of an almond. "Light," she said, and smiled as if she had invented the sun. I told myself not to be precious. I told myself my mother would have called them decent enough. I ironed the lace, folded it with the careful hunger of widows, and placed it in the cedar chest with the christening gown and the letter my husband wrote me from that smoky motel in Reno, 1979, when he was trying to learn how to live with disappointment and I was trying to love him anyway. Tessa's compliments arrived like saucers, shallow and matched. "You're so generous with your space. You're so open to change. You're so good with making do." It took me weeks to realize that good with making do is simply a more elegant way to say used to going without. Daniel's silences grew thick enough to butter. He would half smile, half shrug, and the room would recalibrate to Tessa's temperature. Once, I lifted my eyes to catch his and found them occupied, as if his gaze had been rented out by the hour. His hands were still the same, capable, gentle. He used to place them on my cheeks when fevers came, as if a boy could hold back heat. Now those hands reached for new knobs and handles, new dark oils called finish, new hinges with soft close promises. Soft close, how accurate. Doors that refused to slam even when a woman wanted the sound. When she told me the kitchen smelled dated, I almost laughed. Smells remember. They carry in their pockets all the names we have whispered into soup. They do not expire. She cooked in tall pans, oils high, noise higher. I retreated to the porch and let the night find me. It's only taste, I said to the laurel. It's only taste. But taste, like grief, has a way of repapering entire rooms without asking permission. The neighbors' wind chimes played their indifferent song. I closed my eyes and toured the house I used to live in. In that house, Daniel's socks were always mismatched. Small cars in primary colors populated the baseboards. A red scarf his father gave me behaved like a small fire in the entryway mirror. In that house, I did not negotiate for a drawer. By the time Tessa refreshed the mantel, this was her word for a theft that smiles. The family photographs had migrated to the hallway, where light dimmed and visitors rarely wandered. It's more cohesive, she said. Cohesive to her meant less of me. Daniel watched her arrange us out of the way and said nothing. It is an old story. A good man learning the pleasure of not being the one to cause harm. I'm so grateful we can all be ourselves, she said one night, standing where my husband once stood to button his cuffs. I hope you feel that too. He nodded. I've always been myself. It is only that sometimes no one recognizes her name. We were thinking, Daniel said, and I knew at once that the we did not include me. It might be simpler if you took the back bedroom for a while. We need an office, and Tessa's schedule. His hands were in his pockets. The floor creaked like an old horse after rain. I held my tongue, which was heavy as a wet rope, and I measured his request against the weight of his childhood. Fevers and field trips, clumsy drawings and the borrowing of my good scissors to cut out stars. I remembered his first heartbreak and the way he asked, small and bewildered, what he could do to stop the ache. Nothing, I'd told him. But I can sit with you while you feel it. I moved my things as if moving were a kind of sitting. At my age, you become an expert at packing away the pieces that make a room whisper your name. The back bedroom was cooler, that was true. In summer, the fig tree pressed its leaves against the window like a child asking to come in. I told myself I liked the murmuring shade. We'll make it nice, Tessa said. We'll keep it minimal to give you space to breathe. Space to breathe after you have narrowed a person's lungs is not a gift. It is a measurement. They installed the desk in the front room where my piano used to be. The piano had been moved to the garage, draped in a tarp the color of disappearance. On Tuesdays, Tessa took video calls speaking about wellness, while the house held its breath. I learned the times when her voice softened for clients and sharpened for me. A woman's voice can be a scalpel even when she smiles. Especially when she smiles. You'll love the quiet back here, she said, standing in my doorway as if the door belonged to her mouth. It's restful. Rest is different from being put away. At night, I lay with my ear to the wall and listened to the house recalculating. Pipes spoke to each other in the language of old metal. Somewhere, a drawer slid into its new role with the clean satisfaction of obedience. I passed my hand over the quilt I had pieced the winter the furnace died, and we all slept under our breath. The seams remembered better than we ever do. Weeks turned to the kind of months that go unphotographed. Decluttering became pruning. Pruning became clearing. Clearing became mercy. Mercy. That lofty word sharpened on a strop of convenience. We're just trying to make things easier for you, Tessa said. The way a person might tell a dismantled chair it will thank them when it becomes firewood. Daniel kissed my cheek when he came and went. He smelled of cedar and the consensus of newer rooms. It's only for a while, he said. There is no instrument sensitive enough to detect the exact moment a while turns into always, but I know it happens at a kitchen table when a woman stops reaching for the second cup. I moved the second cup to the back of the cupboard. My hands did not shake. That is the thing about older hands. They remember heat, they remember cradle, they remember the weight and worth of what they have held. They are steady even when the ground is practicing a new definition of floor. The hallway became my museum. There, the photographs survived like relics. A smile behind glass, a wedding cake leaning as if it had listened to the wrong music, Daniel at 7 with a frog cupped in both hands, the frog as surprised as I was by our living. The frames lost their dusting. There were fewer counters now, fewer reasons to touch what had already happened. But I walked there after dinner and named each year under my breath, as if calling a roll and hoping all would answer present. Tessa's refreshes moved with the weather. She purchased rugs that looked like a silence you have to learn, art that matched a sofa more than a wall, plants whose names arrived on heavy tags and left in lighter leaves. On the mantel, where once a seashell from our only trip to the coast nested near a cracked ceramic bird, there stood an arrangement of objects that did not know one another but had been assigned a common story. Curated, she said. Curated is what museums do to the bones of once living things. The kitchen learned to glow in the evening with a light that made even a worn spoon seem complicit. I caught my reflection in the oven door and recognized my mother's mouth, the way it closes around a word that must not be spoken. Women in my family have lips like safety boxes. We know what we are storing. Daniel began to laugh differently. The laugh came from the throat and ended quickly, like a politeness taught to a child. He stayed late at work or stayed home and called it work, and I watched the long choreography of a man who wants to avoid a question and therefore never allows it to be asked. It was Tessa who named my recipes sentimental. There are lighter ways to do stew now, she said cheerfully, as if I had not once kept a sick boy alive with boiled potatoes and stubbornness. She bought a device that steamed more neatly than a pot. The pot went to the garage near the piano. I wondered whether the two of them understood their new kinship. Sometimes she touched my arm when passing, the way we touch elderly dogs to promise we will not step on them. "You're doing so well with all this," she murmured. Smiled. "I have been doing well with all this since 1949. At night, lying in the back bedroom, I listened to something that might have been rain and might have been a plan. The difference between weather and intention is not temperature but trajectory. Rain is fate. Plans have fingerprints. I began to sense hers on the door frames. In the morning, I polished the brass knob in the hallway because it noticed when I touched it. The lantern on the porch accepted a new bulb but not a new eye. The fig tree tapped the window and refused translation. "We're still here," these small things said through the dust and the trend. "We will outlive an arrangement." I believed them. It was the people I had begun to mistrust. Some truths wear shoes with rubber soles. You don't hear them enter until you feel them standing in your place. I was rinsing a cup in the late afternoon when their laughter arrested at the kitchen door. "When the house feels like ours," Tessa said softly. Softly, like a hand smoothing the grain of a tricky wood. "Everything will settle." "Ours," Daniel repeated, tasting the word, not examining it. He used to bring me words and ask me to define them. Now he borrowed them fully made and returned them stained. "She needs change," Tessa went on. "She's stagnant here. You can see it. This will be good for her." But the most obedient adjective in the language. It will do any work you assign it, even burying mothers. I stood very still, my thumb petting the chip on the cup the way a person strokes a scar and calls it weather. In the glass of the cabinet door, I could see the sliver of their bodies, the angle of Daniel's shoulder, the way Tessa stepped into the space between sentences. "We'll help her find a place," she said. "There are communities, people her age. She'll flourish. Flourish like a potted plant in a lobby." I did not move. The kettle clicked off on undecided. The fig leaf pressed its open hand to the window. Truth did not need volume. Simply needed a door left ajar. Daniel said something I couldn't catch. Tessa answered with certainty. "If we keep waiting for her to decide, nothing will change. She defers. She always has. It's kind but it's not a plan. We need a plan." There it was with its fingerprints. I rinsed the cup again though it was clean. To do again what you have already done. Mothers think of this as prayer. The water turned from warm to cold, reminding me that even a pipe has boundaries. When I finally stepped out, my face was the face of a woman I trusted to see me through widowhood. I nodded by habit and by choice. "Would you like tea?" "Yes." "We're out of jasmine but I can steep mint." "We're actually meeting friends," Tessa said. "A little late work social." She smiled apologetically at the word late, as if it required courtesy. Daniel's keys rang in his hand like a school bell. They left. The door learned a new softness, closing on hinges with less and less memory. I stood in the kitchen and let the light from the west rest on my collarbone, where my husband once placed his head when the world was too much for him. "They're making a decision," I told the spoon. "So am I." I looked around at the curated mantel, the almond curtains, the office pretending to require my piano's space. Then I opened the back door and stepped into the thinning garden. The rosemary was leggy. The roses needed between seasons attention. The yard did not care who was in charge. It demanded continuity. I knelt, my knees offering their familiar complaint, and cut from the strongest rose cane a length the size of a sentence. I could root it in a jar. I could take it with me. Some inheritances are cut by hand. They appeared like mushrooms after a wet night. Boxes flattened, tape scissored, a marker uncapped on the counter. "Just getting a head start," Tessa said, a brightness to her voice that made me long for the soft honesty of a cloudy day. "You'll be amazed how much you don't need. Need is a verb that can be trained to heal." She labeled in neat, steady letters that refused flourish. Linens, books, ceramics. When she reached the pantry, her hand hovered. "These are outdated," she decided, drawing a line through jars of beans that had sat on these shelves since Daniel could reach them. She did not label the jar of marbles we used to call a currency. Perhaps childhood has no place in a minimalist economy. Daniel carried a box down the hall, arms taut, head down. "We'll make this as easy as possible," he said. I thought of the soft close hinges and almost laughed. Easy is a door that will not let truth bang. "We found a brochure," Tessa added, laying glossy paper beside the marker. A woman my age smiled from a bench in a place with too much beige. "Community activities. Support. Safety. My garden is a community," I wanted to say. "My grief is an activity." Instead I touched the brochure as if it were an animal I did not want to startle. "Thank you. There is a way to pack a life that honors the choreography of its unfolding." They did not use that way. The boxes swallowed without tasting. My husband's fishing hat went in with the good napkins. My father's pocket knife nestled against the sugar bowl. I rescued what I could without making rescue a scene. In the back bedroom, I opened the cedar chest and lifted the lace curtains one last time. I did not cry. Tears are useful for extinguishing fires. This was a relocation, not a blaze. "I'll take care of the utilities," Daniel said from the doorway, the line of his mouth astonishing me by how unfamiliar it had become. "You won't have to worry about a thing." "I have worried about things since before you were something to worry about," I said gently. He stared at my hands, at the way they folded the lace as if they were suturing a wound. "We're trying to help," he replied. The marker rolled on the counter and fell. Its sound small and decisive. When they went out to the car, something to donate, something to discard, I stood in the hallway and visited each photo like a bishop doing rounds. "Present," I said under my breath, touching glass. "Present. Present." When I reached the oldest, my mother at 19, mouth certain even under the weight of war, I felt her look hard at me. "Get up," her eyes said. "We are not furniture." The marker on the floor bled a little where it lay. I put it in the drawer with the bread clips and the rubber bands and the kindnesses we keep because once they seemed necessary. Then I took the rose cutting and placed it in a jar by the sink. Water lifted it into a new grammar. It would root if given time. So would I. It was a hot day, the kind that makes even bees reconsider their commitments. I returned from the market with a bag of peaches that smelled like a promise you can almost keep. The boxes had multiplied. The brochure had moved closer to my purse, as if it had learned to walk. Tessa's shoes clicked on the hall tile with the confidence of a metronome. "We've been thinking," she began. "We again." Daniel stood behind her, hands in pockets. I wondered if his pockets were tired. "It's time," she said, and smiled the way a nurse smiles when asking you to describe your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. "Time is a circle from where I stand," I said. "It keeps bringing me to the same door." The house needs clarity, she replied. Clarity is what people demand when they are tired of someone else's story. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, it's better if you try the community. Just for a while. We'll help you move. We've already set things up. He gestured in the direction of a place I did not want to look. I set the peaches on the counter. One rolled and thumped to the floor, a sound so honest it almost undid me. You'll bruise it, I said and picked it up, turning its skin to find the soft spot. Fruit continues to ripen after it leaves the tree. Did you know? This is the useless knowledge mothers offer when the essential knowledge, how to keep your place in your own life, feels beyond reach. We can't live like this, Tessa said. No one knows where anything is. The energy is. She fluttered her fingers, a dance of impatience trying to pass itself off as poetry. Yours then, I said. The word slid out like a stone I had kept in my pocket for months, warmed by the heat of my thigh. The energy is yours. Daniel looked at me, and for a breath I saw him as a boy discovering the strength in his legs, the joy of a hill made for running. Then he looked away, toward a future that required my exit. Please, he said, and those hands in his pockets turned him into a man who had forgotten what they were for. Packed one small suitcase. This is not martyrdom. This is triage. A nightdress, 3 blouses, the cardigan with a hole near the hem where my husband used to hook his finger when teasing. My address book. The deed to the house, which I had kept in the cedar chest not because I thought I would need it but because paper likes the smell of old wood. On my way to the front door, I paused at the piano in the garage and lifted the tarp. The keys looked up at me like teeth. I set my palm over middle C and felt the low animal hum of something that, even neglected, knows its purpose. I did not slam the door. It would not have obliged me, with its soft close and its aversion to drama. The porch air felt relieved to see me, as if it had been practicing welcome for weeks. I walked down the path past the laurel hedge and did not turn back. Behind me the house adjusted. Houses are brilliant at surviving. So are the women who used to dust them. Riverside Park has benches that lean as if they understand grief's posture. The one near the cracked fountain is mine, though no plaque would say so. I sat with my suitcase between my knees like a mutt you're not sure will follow you home. Children chased a ball with the urgency of small sons. Somewhere a radio argued with itself. I took out the peach that had bruised and cupped it in my palm. The skin had darkened in a thumbprint the size of a small shame. I bit where it wasn't soft yet and let the juice insist on my wrist. There is value in refusing a stain the last word. I thought about how love lives in the body long after the person it learned its shapes from is gone. My husband's laugh still warms a corner of my left shoulder. Daniel's baby weight still tugs at my forearms. My mother's warnings are stored at the back of my tongue, chalky as aspirin. Those stored loves pressed against my ribs and said quietly, "No. No is not a door slamming. No is a woman finally fitting her mouth to the shape of her life." I watched a pair of teenagers argue with the hot wind. The boy offered a bottle of water. The girl accepted it without gratitude, which is to say she trusted the offering. Envied that. Gratitude is a currency I have overpaid with. A woman my age sat beside me without asking if the seat was taken. "Beautiful day," she said, and we both laughed at how small a net that sentence is. "I like your shoes," she added, which was kinder. We traded 2 or 3 sentences, the kind that make strangers feel like neighbors for the length of a dragonfly's attention, and then she went on to wherever people go when they have somewhere to be. I took from my bag the old key to an older door, a key I had not used in years. Studio 7, the faded tag said. The director of the Community Arts Center had offered me that small space once, in the month after my husband died, because she said I needed a room that would not ask me to be anything but a woman with time. I had kept paying a token rent, a gentle arrangement between women. I had nearly forgotten the key lived in my purse. The fountain coughed. The sun slid toward late. I stood up, brushing peach sugar from my palm, and the suitcase leaned with me like we had agreed on something. The world did not change shape. The bench did not miss me. The pigeons executed their Luftwaffe ballet without so much as a blink. But inside my chest the furniture moved. A chair faced a window. A bed aligned with a door. The corners remembered their right angles. Sometimes you do not win, you move. The door stuck the way old faith sticks. Reluctantly and then all at once. I pushed with my hip, the way you learn to handle stubborn things after decades of trying not to bruise them, and Studio 7 sighed me in. It smelled like old paint and the generous dust of disused shelves. A narrow bed waited under the window, made up with a thin quilt I had stitched from shirts too worn to give away. The kitchenette had a kettle that clicked instead of whining and a chipped mug that was not mine but would be soon. On the sill, a dead geranium presided over the alley like a queen resigned to abdication. I put the suitcase on the chair and stood for a long moment in the doorway, because people like me bless thresholds. Thank you, I told the room, for not asking me to explain. I boiled water. Not because tea would solve any of it, but because it takes the same amount of time for the water to heat whether your life is intact or not, and such impartiality is a comfort. The first sip tasted like a rival. I found a jar, filled it, and set the rose cutting in. It looked ridiculous, a green sentence missing its subject. I placed it on the sill beside the dead geranium and felt an odd peace. Not everything has to come back to life to be honored. Some things are honored by leaving them dead. I took inventory like a woman who knows what it costs to be careless. 2 sheets, a pillow that remembered another head, 6 plates, 3 bowls, a skillet, a broom that preferred corners. The window opened if you coaxed it. The floor listed slightly to the right, which meant anything truly round would end up under the bed if you let it. I laughed, which surprised me. I had not heard my own laugh in a tone that wasn't apology in months. There was no television. There was the radio, pushing through static to find a station skilled at forgiving. I tuned and tuned until a voice, low and certain, told me the weather. Mild, it said. Breezy. I opened the window and allowed breezy to enter, the alley's conversations riding it in, the clink of a bottle, the mutter of tires, someone in the building opposite practicing a sad trumpet. I set the deed on the table and touched its crispness the way you touch the forehead of a sleeping child, to be sure. Paper knows when it is being watched. I did not plan revenge. Revenge is a door that swings endlessly between rooms and never lets you sit down. I planned only to name what was mine, and to put my name back where it had been erased. On the water bill, on the mailbox of my own body. In the quiet, a thought uncurled like steam. I could sell the house. On my terms. Not because I was driven out, but because I was done being invisibly present. The difference matters. One is exile. The other is departure. I wrote a list with a pencil that had been gnawed by a person who did not know pencils are for growing a plan. Bank, lawyer, utilities, roses, transplant if possible, piano, ask about storage, ask about donation, ask if a ghost can live without its instrument. Then I washed the cup and put it on the shelf with a care reserved for the first useful thing after a loss. I slept like someone who had walked out of a map and found the legend folded in her pocket the entire time. Bank lobbies are built to make old women feel like they are inconveniencing the marble. I wore my navy cardigan, the one that gives strangers permission to take me seriously, and I waited my turn as if I were visiting a shrine that required patience. The teller called me by my first name, which was a small mercy. I asked to review the accounts, to remove an authorized user, to make the word authorized mean something again. Of course, she said. Her hair was the color of possibility. She clicked and nodded and called for a manager when necessary. No one asked me to explain why I had allowed someone else to sign in rooms where my name had the older claim. The relief of administrative kindness is underrated. It is a balm for the places that still feel the slap. From there, the law office. I chose the lawyer who did my husband's will, a man who had always believed punctuation could rescue people from arguments. He took off his glasses when I said Daniel's name, as if removing a lens might make him see more clearly. We will file what protects you, he said. We will file nothing to punish. He nodded. I want a good ending, I told him. Not for them. For me. In the afternoon, I walked to the utilities office, which smelled of the missing lunches of working people. The woman behind the counter had a mug with daisies that had seen real sunlight. She made the computer obey me with the authority of a person who has had to reassert her own place more than once. "Anything else?" she asked, ready to keep the machine generous. "No," I lied. What I wanted was to ask if she had a mother and if she noticed that mothers become invisible the moment they are no longer useful. At a copy shop, I made duplicates of the deed and put one in an envelope addressed to myself. A small trick my husband taught me. A dated postmark is a kind of vow a city makes to you when no one else will. Back at Studio 7, I opened the window and let the alley's trumpet player fail until he found the note he had been chasing for an hour. I put the rose cutting in fresh water and watched tiny clear beads gather along its sliced end, a patience you can see. The letter I wrote to Daniel was shorter than the letters I wrote him when he was at camp and lonely. "I am safe," it began. "I will not be visiting the house. Legal matters are in order. Do not contact me until you are prepared to speak to me as a person and not a problem." I did not mention love. Love is a river that will find us if we stop damming it with requests. I addressed the envelope and set it beneath the deed. Through the wall, someone laughed in a register that would not survive a marriage. Métis. I looked at my hands, the age spots arranging themselves into constellations no astronomer had bothered to chart, and I felt a fierce tenderness for the woman they belonged to. When the phone rang and his name lit the small screen, I turned it face down. Silence is not absence. It is a new kind of presence, one that takes discipline. I tied my hair back the way I do when I am reading Soup or Sorrow, and I began to list the things I could carry and the things I could not. The list surprised me with its lightness. I went at dawn because dawn shares my preference for quiet intentions. The street was dew-lidded, the hedges rehearsing their green. Had the key. Course I did. Women like me always have at least one key more than anyone expects. The lock turned with the polite reluctance of a person letting you into their carefully arranged living room. I did not enter the front door. I walked around back to the garden where the roses measured the morning. Tessa had pruned too neatly. Plants know when someone has made a cut for aesthetics instead of health. I knelt where kneeling is less about religion and more about being at eye level with your losses. I brought a trowel and a small pot. From the oldest rose, a bourbon I planted the year Daniel left for college, I took a root-bound section, its stubborn braille a testament to survivals the house had not witnessed. I set it in the pot with soil I had carried in a bag because I am too old to pretend soil is the same wherever you go. "Come along," I told it. "We will learn a new sun." I did not linger. Lingering invites theatrics, and I have retired from those. On the porch, on the little table where I once left grocery lists for my husband, I placed an envelope with the spare keys and a letter addressed not to Daniel but to the house. "Thank you," I wrote, "for holding us when we could not hold ourselves. For echoing our laughter back to us when we forgot we were capable of making it. For not collapsing when we did. I release you." Some will call that sentimental. Call it accurate. I slid Daniel's letter under the door. The house accepted both envelopes without comment. The soft close hinges practiced their refusal to scream. The laurel hedge nodded the way it nods to the morning no matter who claims the deed. I turned away and felt, for the first time in months, that I was not walking out but walking toward. On my way back, the bakery owner, who has a soft spot for old ladies who tip with genuine thanks, handed me the end of a loaf she couldn't sell. "Still good for toast," she said, and winked at a universe that forgets to be kind. I smiled in the language of people who know exactly what toast can do for a morning. In Studio 7, I settled the rose into the brightest corner and watered it with the seriousness of a vow. The radio was playing something that made room for both sorrow and appetite. I buttered the bread and ate it standing, which is how women eat when there is no one left to make conversation small enough to be swallowed. The phone stayed dark. But the house, I knew, would become an argument. Let it. I had found a room where words behaved. Endings are noisy in stories because readers expect symbols. In life, endings sound like a chair pulled back from a table, like a kettle clicking off, like a key placed in a dish. The audible theology of restraint. I sold the house. Quietly. Not out of spite, Though spite is a condiment I now allow myself on rare occasions, but because the rooms deserved to belong to someone whose presence did not require apology. The lawyer arranged what papers need to love one another. The bank behaved like civility does when nudged. The deeds ink joined a new ledger. I bought nothing grand. I signed the lease for Studio 7 for as long as a landlord will trust a woman who pays on time and minds the hall. Daniel wrote eventually. I didn't understand, the letter said. Understanding is a room men enter when no one is watching. He asked if we could talk. I wrote back a sentence that took 72 years to form. Not until you can tell me what you value that is not convenient. I keep his baby teeth in a pillbox. I am not cruel. Only finished with the version of motherhood that equates endurance with worth. The rose cutting rooted. It surprised me by how quietly the miracle occurred. One morning there were tiny white threads touching glass like notes passed to a friend in school. I planted it in a clay pot and set it on the sill. It will bloom in its time, which is not my time and not Tessa's and not the calendar's. It will assert a small redness into a room that has learned to survive on almond. Sometimes I pass the old house on the bus without intending to. A couple has painted the door a blue that knows how to be cheerful without lying. There is a child on the porch with chalk on his knees, drawing a spiral that will not end because he does not yet know about edges. I bless them the way an older woman can bless without a church. I have joined a Thursday group at the community center. We read poems that disobey the furniture. We bring cake no one needs. We lean our heads together and call it weather. Once a month I teach mending. Younger women bring sweaters with wounds they cannot name. I show them how to make a repair visible and call it beauty. If you hide every stitch, I tell them, who will remember what you survived? At night I open the window. The alley's trumpet has improved by grief and practice. The kettle learns my schedule. My hands find the piano keys on my thighs and play songs their instruments have forgotten. When Daniel's name appears on the phone, I sometimes answer and sometimes I do not. Both choices are love. Love is a boundary that invites without erasing. I keep the chair aimed at the window and the bed aligned with the door. The corners know themselves. The floor keeps its tilt. The rose considers the long mathematics of red. On the shelf, the chipped cup breathes like an old dog. 40. I count the quiet. One for the window latch, one for the settling roof, one for the woman I have become in rooms that do not require me to be small. No symbols. Just the sure sound of a life closing one door and, with a soft hand, opening another.